two, three. This time of day, everything's okay. I take a long look around, I have to say, this time of year, it becomes clear.
Good morning. Welcome to your friends and neighbors. My name is Willie Jones, your host for this hour. As you know, I love having some people that I don't know or some of my friends come in and have a little conversation every once in a while. And a really dear friend of mine is going to be with us today. I always have a subtitle for the show. The subtitle for this show is Don't Fence Her In. And you can hear her chuckling to my right. And actually, to my right this morning is Ellen Varick. Good morning, Ellen Varick.
Good morning, Willie Jones.
And how are you today?
I am very well, thank you.
Okay, now Ellen, she is an educator, she is an artist, she is an activist, she is a mother, she is, well, a wife, of course, she is a grandmother. No great-grandchildren yet, though, right?
Yes.
Oh, there is.
I have
that's
four
right.
great-grandchildren.
Oh, that's right. Oh, how could I forget that?
After
of
all,
course you
I
do.
am proud to be 86.
I know, 86. And if I had the energy that this woman has at 68, that she has at 86, I'd be very happy. But, you know, that's the way it goes.
I was given a harness horse off the racetrack that got injured and couldn't race anymore, and she was only 5 years old. And this was quite a number of years ago. And I still have her, and she's what gets me up in the morning. I have to get up and go feed and water my horse.
I know.
And also shovel her out.
And you do that in morning and night.
Yes.
And at 86, and you're out there shoveling and taking care of that horse. I think it's amazing.
I only take half buckets of water, though, now.
Yeah.
I used to be able to do a full bucket. I can't do that anymore.
Well, even those icy mornings, she's walking out there to the horse.
Yes,
Unbelievable.
I have a snow pusher. I don't shovel snow. I push snow.
Right. Well,
that makes a path to the barn.
Yeah. Well, this is why we're calling the show "Don't Fence Her In," because you don't want to fence this lady in. I'm telling you. She goes to the ballet at Saratoga. She goes to the races at Saratoga.
Oh,
you said
harness races. They're
harness
free.
races, right? I talked to you last night. You said, "Oh, I think I'm going to go to Old Castle." Did you go to Old Castle Theater last night?
Yes, I did.
You went. So this woman,
I did.
She's all.
That was quite a raunchy show.
Oh well, folks.
Well,
Now,
I was quite surprised.
By the time this gets on the
air, it was
air,
very, very well done. Two people doing numerous characters, better than I've ever seen that done before.
Right, and this show. Well, now wait a minute.
With quicker changes.
How
well, no, I
about
shouldn't
Rick
say
Howe
that.
And I and Greater
yes,
Tuna?
yes. Greater
now, come
Tuna.
On, give us a
Greater
break.
Tuna was remarkable, but that was a while ago, and my memory is fading out.
It was a while ago. Now, this show probably won't be on until that run is over.
Yeah.
So if people don't get to see it, well, they missed something,
It's very
right?
good, and it's awfully funny.
Okay. Now, earlier this morning, when we were talking out in the lobby, you said to me, I'm taking rhubarb sauce over to my husband, her husband, Phil Varick, who also educator, who has been was in this area in the supervisory union for years.
Years and years. He was supervisor of education of elementary ed for Southwest Vermont.
Right, and he's an
author.
Years. I had a few books out for kids that were wonderful that you illustrated.
Yeah.
I don't know if you illustrated all of them, but...
yes, I did most of them, and I did the jackets for most of them.
Yeah.
The one jacket I really didn't like is one I didn't do, which is awfully conceited of me. But
oh, well, no, that's all right. Well, you're going over to visit Phil today. Phil, unfortunately, has to stay at the Veterans Home.
He's at the Veterans Home now because he's almost 89.
Yeah, but he's doing very well over there.
Doing very well. He's settled in and likes it. He dreaded going, and when he got there, he found he liked it very well, and the care there is outstanding.
Right. Well, that is good to hear.
They really work hard to keep that place cheerful, and they give them all kinds of choices.
And when he gets out that harmonica,
and he gets out his harmonica and plays. He can't remember what I said to him 5 minutes ago, but he remembers the tunes to all the old harmonica songs
And
that he
people
knows.
come around to listen, right?
They do. They gather around and sing, and he has a great time.
Oh, they say that's one of the great things
If I
about
just
music.
tell him a title, he remembers the tune.
Sure.
Now, I can't do that.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
It's amazing.
But I started to say you were going to take over some rhubarb sauce to him.
I'm taking rhubarb sauce from our garden. He adores rhubarb sauce.
Yeah, oh.
And we have enough for all of Bennington County. Anybody wants rhubarb, come on over.
Yeah. Do you do anything special to your rhubarb sauce?
No, you have to put tons of sugar in it.
Ugh,
Not as much
tons
in
of
mine as you do in the old-fashioned rhubarb. This is the Canadian red, and it has very red stems, and it's sweeter than old-fashioned rhubarb.
Now, can you do it just with Splenda or something like that? Or is that just not the
Oh, I've
same?
never tried. I suppose you could. I've never used that, so I'm
Might
not
not
used
have
to it.
the same kick to it.
Well, I don't know. It might be fine.
I can remember when I was a
Might be
kid
fine.
going and finding rhubarb bushes and just pulling off a stalk and start chawing on it. I
Yeah,
loved
that puckers
rhubarb.
my mouth.
I loved it when I was a
You
kid.
like that?
Yeah, I
Oh,
did. I
good.
did. Well, Ellen has enough stories to tell us that we could probably be here for 2 or 3 days. But we've only got an hour. So I think let's have a quick, like a thumbnail sketch of your life, like your education right up through college, and then we can start talking about some of these other areas, like how you lived in
Well-
Alaska and your horses and everything.
Okay, I'll try. I was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, part of Boston. My mother's obstetrician was John Rock, who invented the pill, and he was a devout Catholic.
The pill.
And he was
The
hoping
pill.
everybody would adopt it, and I think
Oh.
probably they have, though. Don't tell the Pope.
Okay.
And he
Pope
said,
Francis, he's all right.
he was a wonderful guy, and I lived there until I was 3.5, and sadly my parents broke up. They were both architects, and I was born in 1928, and of course the really big crash came in 29,
Right.
and my father was out of work, and nobody was building big houses north of Boston, and he got drinking too much in his despair. And my mother sent me down to my grandmother and my great aunt in Connecticut, where I grew up at the Thomas School in Rowayton, Connecticut.
And you say you were 3.5?
I was 3.5, but I was going to my grandmother and my great aunt, and they spoiled me rotten.
Yeah.
And I guess I was a pretty cute little curly-headed blonde, and
I
I
believe
learned to play them like a piano. I think that's where I got my political ability.
Yeah, probably. Now, at 3.5, what were your feelings? Do you remember how you felt at 3.5?
Well, the only thing I really remember is having to walk from where the school dining room was, where I also ate, back to the main residential house of the family, which was quite a long walk on a gravel driveway. And I was always scared I'd meet a skunk.
A skunk.
Now, I don't know why I had that in my head, but I can remember being terrified when it got to be slightly dark that I would meet a skunk.
Well, 3.5. I think that's an okay.
But
fear
I
to
made
have.
the walk anyway.
Yeah. So you did that 3.5 years old all by yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
And so that was fun. And
And you were-
I grew up there and went from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade
Oh.
at the Thomas School.
Uh-huh.
In 8th grade, I used to have to take care of the horses. My sister and I, there was 5 horses were sent down from Wilton, Connecticut every fall and every spring for riding lessons at the school. And my job was to feed the horses morning and night. And I used to come into the 8th grade class reeking of horse,
Yeah, of
which
course.
to me was like Chanel number 5. I was a horse crazy from the day I was born. And all the other kids in the 8th grade would sort of move away and hold their
Yeah.
noses, and I just would grin from ear to ear.
I can remember being in school, knowing the kids that which ones lived on the farm or not. They'd come in, and
You could
also the
tell.
ones you can always tell the ones that have a wood fire or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
so right through 12th grade. Wow.
Yeah. Pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, 14 years at the same school.
Wow. And what do you remember the most about boarding school?
Well, I just remember we had a wonderful faculty, and we had marvelous teachers. And the 7th and 8th grade were in what was known as the boathouse. It was a house on pillars and some foundation. It had 2 floats with gangplanks out in front of it,
Ah.
and rowboats. We learned to row. we had woodcraft from 6th grade through 12th grade, and I learned to saw and hammer and build things and carve things. And it was we also had to write a theme every week. We also had to write a piece of music every week. And our music teacher came down from the New England Conservatory every Sunday night and spent all day Monday at the school teaching composition, 6 through 12, and directing the choral group in the afternoon. We sang 3 Bach chorales every morning in assembly. We sang a Bach cantata every semester. And every March we went down to New York City to the Oratorio Society to hear the B minor Mass.
What an education.
So I'm pretty saturated with Bach, and of course he's my favorite composer.
Well, I know when I come into your home, quite often the classical music is playing on the radio. I will hear
love
that.
to have music in the background.
Right. Just a little break from what you're speaking. I just came to know Ellen really in the last 2.5 years. I had known Ellen and her husband Phil for years, but
as fellow teachers
that's
in the
right.
district.
That was about it.
Yeah,
that was about it. I always thought she was kind of a cool person. I loved Phil. Phil was the nicest guy. He still is. And I started working at or volunteering at WBTN. I was there for quite a few years. In the last couple of years, Ellen would come in as a guest once in a while, and we would talk and all that. And then we started having what we called supper clubs over her house.
Oh, yeah.
And it has been, in fact, we're having one tonight. And you never know when new friends are going to come into your life. You know, I never would have dreamed that I would become friends with Ellen and Phil, that I'd be going to her house like almost once a week for dinner. But it's been a wonderful friendship that has developed, and I'm so happy that I've gotten to know her.
Well,
I don't care
thank
what
you.
age you are. To me, you're as young as springtime. So
Oh, my goodness
I
gracious.
just wanted to get that out. But
Well, thank you, Willie.
so that is quite an education. All that music.
It was a wonderful education. I got a magnificent education. I really did.
But was it easy for you to write a musical composition once a week?
Well, we wrote little tunes. We
Well,
didn't do full-blown
Well, I know,
orchestral
but-
pieces
and
or
did
anything.
you have to learn
But
an
David Barnett taught us how to put down. We learned the ABCs of how you write down
Right,
music,
Right.
and about the length of notes and all that sort of thing, and how you put it down on the staff.
Did you have to work with instruments, or did you learn an instrument, or?
I learned violin. I was not very good at it. I played alone, not in groups for the most part, and I oftentimes I would play the easy parts fast, and the hard parts slowly, and that doesn't work very well when you're playing in a group.
So you're not as good as Jane Hanks?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, and
Jane
I'm not
Hanks.
going to quite catch up to her either.
Right.
Jane is, what, 106
Isn't
now,
that
I think?
amazing?
She's
Amazing.
absolutely amazing, and she was playing her violin until just a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah, with the Sage City Symphony.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So, all right. So you go through boarding school, and then were you going off to college right immediately afterwards, or was there a break, or what happened after boarding school?
No, I went straight to college,
Mhm.
and I was a bit young. I think I was a year younger than most of my classmates, and I went there expecting to major in art, and I ended up majoring in geology. And then my first job was teaching elementary school, so you just never know.
Yeah, you don't.
And I must put in a word for a liberal arts education. It came in awfully handy, because I married in the middle of my senior year, and Phil and I went off to Alaska immediately after graduating, and halfway to Alaska we ran out of tires, but that's a whole nother story. I was going to tell you about liberal arts educations.
Yeah, well, let's
We
get
taught at King Island
Yeah.
in the Bering Straits, which was a little tiny rock that stuck up out of the water 90 miles due west of Nome, Alaska. And we could see Siberia from the top of our island. And we also could look north and see the westernmost point on the North American continent, Cape Prince of Wales.
So you actually could see Russia from your window,
Yes,
like
we
Sarah
could.
Palin said.
Well, not from the window. You had to go on top of the island, which was 1,200 feet high.
I know.
But I really could see it, yes.
Yeah.
And we, I also did all the medical work. Well, you can imagine how much training I'd had straight out of Vassar College.
Yeah, you have some
I'd
great
had
stories.
first aid, and I'd had life-saving, and I'd had to pass a swimming test in order to graduate. And so one time I had a fellow, young man, who'd had a bad scrape on his knee. There was still a lot of tuberculosis in the village, and it was before the, what is it, streptomycin, I guess, was very good for that, and they hadn't got that on the market yet. And this fellow's knee became tubercular, and it went right down to the bone, and it was a mess. And we had every night at 6 o'clock, we had a radio schedule with the hospital in Kotzebue, Alaska, which was 300 miles away by air. And he told me to immobilize the leg.
Was that the closest hospital?
Yes.
300 miles away?
Yes, and you couldn't get there anyway. We were in the middle of the moving ice pack.
Right, jeez.
And you couldn't get on or off the island for about 6 months a year. But anyway, I was told to immobilize this knee in a plaster cast. Well, luckily I had taken sculpture at Vassar College,
Right,
and
art
I had
came in
worked
handy.
in plaster.
Right, right.
So they had the materials there to make a plaster cast, and I did immobilize his knee and left it open in the middle of it, and it was, eventually he got well. He was flown off the island at the same time as we had to send a woman ashore who had murdered her husband.
Oh, jeez.
And we had to deal with that, too. He had been very abusive to her, and one night she waited till he was sound asleep and stuck a large knife in him, and then she ran down through the snow at midnight, or it was after midnight, I think about 1 o'clock in the morning, and she came down and told us all about it. She was in a short-sleeved shirt and bare feet in the snow, and she was terrified that he was going to come after her. Well, my husband thought, oh my goodness, poor Joe, and he went up to see if this was true. Well, it was very true, and Joe was expiring in a large pool of blood, and then he suddenly dawned on him, my God, I left my wife down there with a murderer. So he came roaring down to see if I was all right, and I had given her a nice big cup of hot chocolate, well laced with phenobarb.
Oh, God,
She was out cold on the sofa, so she was all right. I was all right. Everybody was all right. We all lived through it.
Yeah.
But
How
but
many?
she was flown out after 10 days. They had to pick and shovel a place wide enough for a plane to land on the ice, because it's not flat ice. This is all tumbled up and down with pressure ridges and whatnot.
Oh, my God.
So it was an exciting couple of weeks. They finally got her off.
How many people were in this, for the area that you were in?
There was 150 people in the village and about 50 very large husky dogs.
Wow, only 150.
Yeah,
And how many
and a
were
lot of
chil-
those were children.
Yeah, how many were children? Do you know about offhand,
Well,
percentage-wise?
the mortality rate there was pretty high, but there was, let's see, there were 34 children in my 4 grades, and Phil had about 20 something
Wow.
in 6 through 8, 9,
So it's
10.
about a third of the population was
Yeah,
kids.
yeah.
Wow.
And there was a Jesuit priest there the first year,
Uh-huh.
and he was a very interesting guy, Father Tom Cunningham, and he eventually ended up dying of a heart attack mushing a dog team between Point Barrow and Prudhoe Bay.
Oh, was he on a mission of some sort or?
No,
No, he
no,
was
they'd
just-
had a church there ever since I think 1903 or 1907, something like that. And he was a wonderful guy. He used to come down and play rummy with us, gin rummy, every Thursday night, and bring a bottle of Christian Brothers wine. He didn't serve full-blown wine in church because he didn't want the Eskimos to get a taste for it.
Right, right.
So he brought it down to dinner on Thursday nights.
What about the food? Did you get to sample a lot of the different kinds of foods that the Eskimos ate that you weren't used to eating?
We did, but we got our groceries once a year.
Once a year. Now, how
From
would you
Seattle
make out that
on a
grocery?
boat.
How would you do that grocery list?
They gave us a standard order the first year.
Ah.
If you forget the mustard, tough luck till next year.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And that standard order, and of course I'd never cooked. I'd scrambled eggs and cooked toast and washed a lot of dishes in my young life, but I had never been allowed to cook because my grandmother cooked. And in the summertime, the school cooked for us at our house.
Oh, okay.
when the school was closed in the summer. They rented the school buildings out.
So you were only responsible for cooking for you and Phil?
Yes.
You didn't have to
Well,
cook
we
for
did
him.
have to do a hot lunch program.
Oh,
He did breakfast for the big kids, and I did lunch for the younger kids. In the morning, I did the medical work in the village, and I had to give shots. And the shots were penicillin in oil and wax, which necessitate a 18-gauge needle,
no, wait a
which is a
minute.
very large needle.
What's penicillin, oil, and wax?
It was penicillin in oil and
Oh,
wax,
in-
so it could be kept at room temperature.
Oh, I see. I got you. Okay.
And the first year we were there, we had a measles epidemic. And the priest came to Phil and he said, "You better get your wife prepared for this, because the last time we had a measles epidemic, we lost every child under 3 years of age."
Had you two had measles?
Yes.
You had both had them. Okay.
Yeah. And so I went all over the village giving shots like crazy every time a kid
Yeah,
came down with the
sure.
measles, because several of them had pneumonia. We lost 2 children out of it because they were also tubercular. But young, very young children. One had spinal meningitis, and one, I guess, just had bad pneumonia. But anyway, I learned a great deal more than the children at King
Oh,
Island.
I'm
Believe
sure
me.
you did.
It was
I'm sure you
a
did.
life-changing event, and we're still in touch with some of our students that
Oh,
we
that's
had
wonderful. Have you ever had any of them come to visit or anything? Have you spent?
there. Yes,
much-
we have.
Oh, you have.
Alex McToyuk, my favorite 3rd grader,
Yeah.
who now also has Alzheimer's disease.
Oh.
He lives in Portland, Oregon. But when Alaska became a state, they no longer provided a teacher to the school. They built a technical high school in Nome to take the older ones, and if the Eskimos didn't send their kids to school, they had their children taken away from them.
Oh.
So they didn't go back to the island.
Huh.
They successfully killed a culture, and it was very sad, because it was a very interesting culture. One of the interesting things is how quickly they adapted to modern stuff. My little Alex in 3rd grade had stories printed in the Alaska Magazine. And his daughter, his son rather, Mark, is now a computer expert living in Phoenix, Arizona.
Huh.
And that boy's grandfather was a Stone Age man. He made his own tools from bone and reindeer antler and that sort of thing. And to have made that much of a cultural
Right.
jump in
Right.
2
In three gen- two
generations is
generations,
just
right.
amazing.
Wow. And what were they like as students? Were they
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Wow.
Brilliant. They came in not speaking English, and they went out. They could write stories. I had to teach them by letting them do pictures, which I captioned, the younger children, because I didn't speak Eskimo.
And being artistic, you were.
And the
right.
youngest ones, well, they did pictures of all sorts of different aspects of life at King Island, and we made them into books. And the parents were very nice. They provided bleached sealskin covers for these books that we created.
Bleach skin seal.
They were wonderful.
Wow.
And-
Now, what made you decide to go to Alaska in the first place?
Well,
Why'd-
Phil wanted to homestead. He had this dream. He'd gone up there during his summers from Dartmouth College after he came back from being in the Navy.
And he was a strapping young lad. I've
Yes.
seen photos, and he's a tall drink of water. This guy.
Yes, he was 6'4".
Yeah.
And his ship was sunk in the South Pacific, and he decided that he wanted to go back. He had been in the Navy Air Cadet program at Dartmouth, and he kept getting shipped around and around and around to different schools for pre-flight training, and finally they gave them a choice. I guess the program had been overloaded. They gave him a choice of dropping out and being drafted, staying in and going on doing what they were doing, or immediate overseas duty as a seaman 2nd class. Well, guess what Phil chose?
I can get. And the
He
thing.
wanted to get into the action,
And
so
the thing
he
is,
did.
if people, for a while, and I think they were rerunning them for a while, on WBTN, Phil had been taped, and he was telling some of his
1:30
stories.
on Mondays.
Well, is it still on now?
I don't know if
I
it's
don't
still on,
know.
but it has been for a long time.
I'm telling you, the stories he has, and especially
They're
you said that
wonderful.
the ship that was sunk and he was
Yep.
in the water. Oh man,
He was
I
in the
mean,
water for 2 hours, and he grew up in New Bedford, so he knew enough. His father was a fisherman as well as being the city surveyor for New Bedford. And he knew enough to go off the windward side of the ship, which some of them didn't. And the burning ship came right down on some of them.
Yeah, well, he's
But
had
he slid down a fire hose and got off the windward
amazing
side.
stories, and also he talks about a lot about Alaska too. But,
Yeah.
So, what's the story of King Island now?
Well, there's a village
there is
falling
still-
into disrepair,
Oh.
and nobody goes out there anymore.
Huh.
It's very hard to get to. Most of the people in Nome had never been to King Island.
No, you said you lost your tires or whatever. What's that story? Because that's an interesting story. Getting to you had trouble with
the
your tires
going up
getting
the
to
Alcan?
Alaska. Yeah.
Well, we in our naivete, soon after we were married, we bought a car in Poughkeepsie, New York, and it was a 1932 Buick four-door sedan with wooden spoked wheels.
Ooh.
But in those days, you didn't ask what the gas mileage was. We discovered it did 8 miles to the gallon. It also had been up on blocks during the war, and the tires, which looked wonderful, had sort of dry rotted a bit.
Oh, jeez.
And we started out with 4 good tires, and I guess 5 good tires. It must have had a spare. And we ended up with 3 and one with a slash in the side, about halfway up the Alcan Highway, which at that time was all gravel and pretty rough going. It still had some corduroy road, which is where they lay down logs in wet places and you drive over the logs.
Amazing.
And anyway, we were running out of tires, and here you are in the middle of nowhere, no sign of human habitation in any direction, and we came upon a road crew. And Phil said, and I wondered they didn't laugh at us, "Do you know anywhere around here we could get a job?" we need to earn some money to get another tire.
Oh, gee.
And they didn't laugh, which was awfully good of them. But they said there's a couple from Oklahoma up the road. Somebody up there was watching out over us.
I guess so.
And they're turning an old road camp into a motel gas station restaurant. And you might be able to get a job there.
Yeah.
So we went up there, and they said, "Oh, we'd love to hire you. Yes, we've got plenty of work, but we don't have any money to pay you." And we said, "Oh, that's okay. Just feed us and house us until we can get one more tire flown in." And it was eventually flown in by the Royal Canadian Air Force via Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. And we were at mile 297, 397, I think it was, mile 397 on the Alcan, which I think is, 1,500 miles in its entirety, something like that by the time it gets to Fairbanks. And so we worked there, and I learned how to bake bread, which I didn't know how to do, and I learned how to wait table, and I learned how to pump gas. It was all very useful. And they did house us and feed us, and Phil worked as a carpenter, which he didn't know how to do, and that was very handy.
Now, he would have been a good soda jerk.
Yes.
Because he worked in a soda shop.
He did.
Counter
He
for
worked in an
ages.
ice cream factory,
Right.
and then he worked in the local drugstore in Padenham, Mass, dishing up ice cream cones and sodas and
Right,
so forth.
right.
He loves ice cream.
You know, I know.
He's a fanatic for ice
I
cream.
know, I know.
I never bother to make dessert
Right. You don't-
because
no, you
all
don't
he
need it.
wants is ice cream. I have to be sure there's several
Right,
kinds
right.
available.
So, I mean, your education has come from so many places, so many areas.
Yes, it
and,
has.
and that's why I find that you're very handy around your house all the time, too. It seems like you've always fixed something or you've mended something or
Well,
I don't know
that's
about
'cause
your
I had
sewing,
to learn to
but
do.
I don't know about sewing,
workshop.
but you're certainly good at
Oh, I used
crafty
to
type
make the
stuff.
kids' clothes. Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Did you made all? Now you had how many children?
4.
Right.
We had 4 children, and we had them sort of in a bunch. They were all 17 months apart on purpose.
Oh, okay.
They were all premeditated,
Oh, okay.
and nobody ever believed that. But they
Premeditated.
were. And I wanted it that way so that they would be closer friends, and they were.
And have they all been as adventurous as you and Phil were?
Well, I think so. We took them out west to visit the national parks, and the result was all but one stayed out there. Our
Yeah.
son still lives in New
Right.
Mexico, and our middle daughter lives in Durango, Colorado, and is on the search and rescue team there, and is trying to climb all the 14,000 footers that she can. And she's pushing 60. And my oldest daughter lived in Tacoma, California, near the atomic test site because she was fighting the storage of atomic waste under Yucca Mountain.
She got that from Mom.
And she has succeeded in that. She did all sorts of hydrologic studies of the mountain and got grants from outfits in Washington and so forth and so on. And but she now lives across the street from us in Meg's house. Our youngest daughter, Meg, was for many years a nurse up at the West Wing at the hospital here, and went through what is now what used to be St. Joe's Business School, and it became Southern Vermont College. And she went through the nursing program there. She first got her LNA and then her RN. And unfortunately, she died of colon cancer in 2010.
Yeah.
And we miss her terribly, but
I know you
her
do.
gardens are still prolific, and we get vegetables from her garden and our garden. And
who takes care of those gardens?
Jennifer, she's trying to
Your other daughter.
cut them way back. Yeah,
She's
she
trying
lives
to.
in Meg's house, and she works for PAVE
Right.
3 days a week. And she's working very hard at that.
Now you said garden. You're talking about gardens. You are. How much of a garden are you having this year? I mean, you're
Too
still
much.
86, and you're still out there. You've got your vegetable garden, I'm sure. You're going to have your flowers.
I have flower gardens, which are in pretty poor repair at the moment. I have one that was Phil's flower garden, and I'm trying to maintain that for his sake.
Right.
And I do have 2 squares left. We loved the gardens at Mount Vernon. They're in squares with mowed grass in between, so that you can say, let's see, today I'll do this square, and tomorrow I'll do that square, and you can get at them. And they're very handy that way.
Yeah, I have that beautiful old tree out there by them, too.
So I still have 2 squares going as vegetable gardens.
And you got
I've already got my kale planted.
Oh, okay.
And I have
kale,
a
now
wagon
that's the
full
big
of
thing.
plants that I'm going to go home and plant this afternoon.
I that's what I mean. This woman has more energy than I've ever had, I think, in my whole life.
Well, I don't have as much as I used to.
Well,
you know, in your head you stay young, but the body does not.
yeah, well, you're not letting yourself rust out too much. You really aren't. And you got a beautiful little pond there.
Oh, that's known as Ellen's Pond. Everybody in my family thoroughly disapproved of me having a pond built, and it's not really a pond, it's a catch basin.
Oh,
And even though I'm a devout environmentalist, I did not want to have to go through all the thousands of hoops you have to go through to have a real pond, which would involve damming up a brook or something. So we didn't do that.
Okay.
It's a catch basin. And it was dug by my wonderful septic tank man, Bob Church. And he was so smart. We only have 4 feet of loam in the flat area west of our house where our gardens are. And if you go down 4 feet, you hit gray clay. Gray clay does not grow anything.
No.
So he dug a ditch around what would be the perimeter of the pond and filled it with gray clay from the center of the pond. And so it had a dam all the way around. And that held water. It was wonderful. And it filled up, and it stayed filled up, and we have all kinds of newts and frogs and whatnot.
You have a lot of, yes, a lot
The
of...
shallow end of it is beginning to fill up with cattails, but that brings lots of interesting birds. And we've enjoyed that pond very much. It's 8 feet deep at one end and shallow at the other
I
end.
didn't realize it was that deep. Oh, wow.
Well, it used to be. It's probably not that deep now.
And you still, and you also have a lot of little critters that like to come around, your possums and raccoons and cats that sort of
and
show
I feed
up
the
door.
birds on my deck. When Phil and I started having joint replacements, our house was built in 1785, before Mozart died, and before George Washington became president. So it's an oldie goldie.
It is.
And the stairs are a back stair, and they're more like a ladder than a stair. And it does not have a front stair,
Right.
which they usually had, those center chimney houses, because the center chimney is quite small, and it does not have a cooking fireplace across the back of it, which they usually had. And my mother, the architect, kept looking for it. And I said, Mother, it didn't have a cooking fireplace on the back. The cooking fireplace was across the end of the L. It's a T-shaped house with a T out back that goes into a four-bay woodshed. And when we bought it, it still had a active privy and a boardwalk that went to the privy. And there was a ceiling over the boardwalk. The boards in the ceiling are almost 2 feet wide. They are the biggest boards you ever saw. I'll show them to you one day.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we where was I going with that one? I can't
I don't know.
remember.
You were
How
talking
did we
about. I
start
don't know.
off?
We were talking about the house, and I had asked you about, or I mentioned how you
Oh,
had a
I
lot
know. I
of
started
critters
to say
coming.
about
And
the new L.
Yeah.
That was it. We couldn't make the stairs anymore, so we put on 2 bedrooms on the west end with sliding glass doors wide enough to take a wheelchair onto a deck.
right.
And we turned the little corner bedroom downstairs into a bathroom laundry.
You were
So-
so wise. You were thinking ahead. You were
Well,
thinking ahead. You know
I knew
you
we were
weren't
going to get old someday.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's people should be thinking about things like that.
Well, I thought about it so thoroughly that I wasted an awful lot of money taking out an insurance for home care. I don't need home care. I'm still taking care of myself entirely.
I know you are.
With a downstairs laundry and downstairs bedroom, and I feed the birds out on the deck. I wake up in the morning and look out my 8-foot sliding door, and there are all the birds and the squirrels, I might add,
Well, yeah, can't help that.
out there, and it's just a lovely way to wake up.
Yeah. Explain your cellar too, because your
Oh, the cellar.
your cellar can be so cold because
Because it has a stream running through it.
right.
The cold spring is a public spring that's up the hill from us, and it has various underground branches, I'm sure, and some of them run through our cellar, and our cellar is paved with marble from the very first marble quarry in Vermont, which is up on Cross Hill Road, northwest of us, and these big slabs are just laid down on the gravel with water running between them. So it makes it lovely and cool, and the cellar was divided into several different rooms for root vegetable storage and so forth. And it's a marvelous place to store food down there.
See, I said this woman has so many stories, You could go. I know, and I know there's probably a lot more. We could talk about Alaska too.
Well, we
you
went
said
back
you were
there a second 2 years to Cordova, Alaska, which is a totally different climate. 154 inches of rain a year down near Valdez, where the big oil spill was. And they're still
right.
suffering from that oil spill.
Yeah.
And the dear Exxon Mobil oil company has never paid its penalty. And there's a big 6-inch layer of uck. And almost all the salmon now has to be farm raised in that area, and it was the major center of salmon fishing, wild salmon fishing.
Oh, you know,
when we were there.
That reminds me of fishing. How about the way they did fish in the village where you were, and how they would use every single bit of whatever they caught?
Oh yeah,
that's something.
Yeah, they jigged through a hole in the ice with an unbarbed hook. And when they pulled it up very, very carefully and then flipped it onto the ice, and of course it froze almost immediately.
I'm sure, yeah.
And they also did, we ate king crab. We were eating king crab long before you guys ever heard of it. And king crab, they're huge, and we used to have one apiece for dinner sometimes. We either had them hot with butter or cold with mayo. And they have 8 legs, I believe.
I think so.
Something like that.
I think so.
And they're absolutely delicious. But by February, everybody in the village had had enough of crab. The Eskimo language incorporates words within words so that a word is really a whole sentence. They had a word for, we have had enough of crab, which you heard frequently in February.
But it's just one word.
Yeah,
for that.
A great big long word with all this incorporated into one word. And By February, we really had all the crab we could
I'm
eat.
sure. And did you learn a lot of the language yourself?
Not much.
Not
We
much?
had a wonderful old hereditary chief of the village, Olorana, after whom our eldest daughter's middle name,
Oh,
Jennifer Olorana Virik. And he used to come over regularly and teach us words, but it was all nouns.
yeah.
And you can't
You can't.
speak
Yeah.
a language without some verbs
Yeah,
and
you need a
things.
few. Yeah.
And
yeah.
the verbs were very complicated, how they worked. And the fact that everything got kind of incorporated, the structure of the language was quite different from anything I'd ever done. I'd had Latin and I'd had French, and I wasn't very good at French. Our teacher was too good-natured, and she didn't make us speak it. I could write it with a dictionary in one hand, but I couldn't speak it
Oh, she
fluently.
didn't. Huh. When you talked, when you were saying about that, it reminded me. I had a guest on. You know the singer Katie Beck.
Yes.
You know that beautiful voice. She was talking about how she goes to Middlebury during the summers and takes a class where she learns about singing opera either in different languages, and they're only allowed to speak that language. They cannot speak English.
That's the
at
only way to do
all.
it. And this teacher was much too kind-hearted, and she didn't insist on that. Excuse me a minute.
Oh, that's fine. And she said that one of her favorites was German, which I thought, gosh, it seems like that would be
Oh,
so
gosh,
hard to
that's a
sing.
guttural language.
Yeah, but she said it was actually one of her favorite ones. But she likes to go up there and take those courses during the
isn't that
summer.
wonderful?
Yeah. Did you bring things back with you from Kings Island? Little mementos,
Well, Phil
souvenirs?
had to have a complete hunting outfit, which involved sealskin pants, and because of his size, they had never had to make pants that took 6 sealskins. They normally took 5.
Sure, 6'4", yeah.
And so the Eskimos would tell their friends in Nome where we went in the summertime. They always went ashore every summer to salmon fish in the rivers and pick berries and mix them up into what you asked about Eskimo foods.
Yeah.
Eskimo ice cream, so-called, is a mixture of reindeer suet, seal oil, which tastes like cod liver oil,
Oh, gee.
and berries, and they whip it all up together, and that was their source of vitamin C in the wintertime, and very important.
And was it sweet?
No,
No, not at all.
no,
I
it
didn't
was
think
not
so.
sweet.
So they didn't. Oh,
And the fat kept it from
sure.
oxygenating.
Oh, yeah.
So they would come back with sealskins packed full of Eskimo ice cream, and they'd smoke and dry salmon on racks, and they'd come back with tons of that. And they used to pick the umiaks, which were 32 feet long, up with a crane and put them onto the ship, the North Star, that took us back to the island in the fall.
Umiaks?
Umiak.
Umiak. What's that?
Umiak it's like a big dory, wooden frame with walrus hides stretched over it. But the walrus hides had to be split into 2 thicknesses. The outside was used to cover the boats, and the inside layer was used to cover their houses, like tar paper roofs. And I remember the first time I went out to the freighter, the first year we went out ahead of the villagers to the island, and we insisted on getting there before they did to see what there was in the way of teaching materials.
Yeah.
Guess
Sure.
what we found?
Nothing.
Scott
Oh.
Forsman's Sally, Dick,
Oh,
and Jane,
Sally,
and
Dick,
Fluff, and Spot.
Oh, great.
And you can imagine how attractive that was to Eskimos. They'd never even seen a cat.
Oh, of course not. And
So
a little wagon, the
we
red wagon.
immediately ditched that, and we got the older children to tell us legends and history and talk to their grandmothers and grandfathers, and we made those into stories, which we peeled off 1 sheet at a time from a purple hectograph and made them into booklets for them to read, and that's
Right.
how we got started with writing and illustrating.
Right. That's amazing.
Our master's project, when we came out after King Island for 1 year, we went to Plymouth State College in New Hampshire, and our master's project was a book about King Island. It's called Eskimo Island. It's out of print now, but you can sometimes find it on the internet, old library editions.
Doesn't the Bennington Library have Phil's books, I believe?
I think they
You-
probably
Phil's
do,
book.
yeah.
I think there's probably still there.
I think so. And so that was how we got started at illustrating.
And you went back for one more year? Or
We
how many
went-
more years did you do this?
We did 2 years and 3 summers at King Island and
Okay.
in Nome. And then we came out to get our master's degree, which took us a winter and a summer. And I had Jennifer between spring and summer semester, and I only missed one class. And so that took care of it. And then we went back to Cordova. We didn't go back to King Island. We went to Cordova near Valdez. And
Were the
we
conditions?
drove across the country. We brought 2 puppies from King Island back with us. And at 6 months, there was 2 females. They began to fight with each other, and I was afraid they'd kill each
Were they
other. So we had to
huskies?
give one away right away.
Huskies, oh.
Yeah, huskies from the island.
Oh, wow.
And one of them we had to give away, and then we had, as we arrived at our house to move in, we came in a Woody station wagon, and in the way back was the dog having 12 puppies in
Oh,
the
my.
process of
12.
Jennifer, 2.5, standing on the middle seat saying, "Oh, Mommy, there's another one. Oh, there's another one." This went on for some time.
Yeah, I
I
would say
was
with
sitting
12.
in the front seat with Timothy, age 1, in my lap, and I was pregnant due the following March with Pamela. And,
And 12 puppies.
and a diaper bucket between my feet on the floor. And 12 puppies being born in the back. And the neighbors remembered this arrival so well that when we had our 50th anniversary, they gave us a little metal Woody station wagon. And nobody could understand why they were giving us that. But I burst out laughing.
that's
I knew
funny.
very well why
Yeah,
they were
of course,
giving us
of
that.
course.
They'd never forgotten this arrival.
Now, you mentioned married 50 years. I know in a couple weeks, you're attending your 60th?
65th.
65th college reunion.
Yes.
65 years. And you said there are still quite a few of your classmates left.
There's 62 of them coming.
Do you know how
They,
many were
they
in your-
haven't been able to put them up at Alumni House because there's too many of us. We were a combined class. There were some accelerated 47s. There were some 48s. And then and let's see, accelerated 47s who were 48s. There were 48s who accelerated and became 49s. There were 49s who were really 49s, like myself.
Right.
And so it's a combined wartime class.
Now, you said 64. Do you know how many were in your graduating class?
I don't.
No. Wow.
I
Six,
don't.
That's, I
Well,
mean, I
we
think
used
that's
to
pretty
reunion
incredible.
separately, 48 and 49, but
Oh.
then we requested to be,
Sure.
we were sort of overlapping classes, and
That
we've
makes sense.
requested to reunion
Yeah.
together, so we are. And they're having to put us up at the Hampton Inn.
Yeah. So will it be a wild and crazy weekend, or
I don't know.
I don't know. What are they usually like? Are they pretty? You have to.
They're
watch your-
pretty educational usually. They
Oh.
have all kinds of seminars for us to go
Oh,
to.
golly, that's not much fun. Come
Oh,
on.
we have fun too.
No,
don't
I'm
worry.
sure you
we
do.
have plenty
I'm
of fun.
sure you do.
Yes,
Wow,
we
that
do.
is that's an incredible adventure that you and your. Oh, you mentioned Phil's pants. Phil made this. Now this is I don't know when he did. He made this unbelievable knapsack. Or it's not
Oh,
really
he
a,
made
it's
that
bigger,
for
it's more
my
than
wedding present.
It's more than a knapsack, but
It's
I mean,
it's a Trapper Nelson pack,
right. It's
and
unbelievable.
it's on a wooden frame, and it has 2 pins going down, one on each side, that hold the canvas bag to the frame, so you can easily use it as a pack frame or as a pack.
Right.
And it has also it's white canvas, and it's all sewed by hand
Right.
by Philip,
It's beautiful.
whose nickname in college, which he would not like me to divulge, but I think a lot of people know it, was Moose Jaw.
Moose jaw, right?
And he inscribed it in sewing on the back. It was made in 1948 for Ellen by Moose Jaw.
Yeah.
It's one of
Now,
my treasured possessions.
Did you carry this around a lot with you on all your different?
Well, I went
mean,
off on my honeymoon with it packed full on my back, and my grandmother shook her head and she said, "Oh, I never thought it would come to this." She was quite horrified. But we had a very nice, very rainy honeymoon in the middle of my senior year in Hanover, New Hampshire,
You got
where
married
we went
young.
to ski and there wasn't any skiing.
You got married young.
Yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
I had to have my mother sign me away.
Oh dear, golly.
And anyway, we're still married.
That's right. That's right. And So you've got all these wonderful adventures that you had in Alaska. You've also done a lot of you've done a lot of traveling too.
We were
Um,
very lucky being teachers to have summers off
right.
until he got into the administrative stuff. Went one trip to Russia and St. Petersburg and Helsinki and Vilnius, Lithuania. We were in Vilnius, Lithuania the first year that they allowed French and British and Americans to be in their folk festival. And somebody got up on a seat at this outdoor amphitheater. We went to one of the concerts and they got up on the seat and hollered at the top of his voice, "Long live the Lithuanian language." And he'd have been shot for that a few years before. This was during Gorbachev's time. And it was very interesting to see Russia kind of loosened up at that point. They were still kind of scared to talk to us, but it was a marvelous time to be there. We went to Istanbul and down the Turkish coast in a boat that took only 100 people. And we went to Crete, Rhodes, Santorini on the way back to Athens, where we ended up. We went to Barcelona and went across the southern Pyrenees and around the West End and back by Bordeaux and Lourdes and so forth across the northern Pyrenees and back through Dali's hometown. And that was a wonderful trip. We did a lot of wonderful trips. Our first one was to England. We went to our neighbors, the Shurinks' parents, Janet Shurink's parents in Zwolle, Holland. And then we went from there to England and visited various friends. We kind of designed that trip ourselves. That was our first trip. But I've been very lucky to go on trips with painters. I've been to Ireland for 2 weeks and to the Southwest for 2 weeks and so on with painting groups.
Right. Do you have a favorite place that you visited that that was the one that stood out the most for you?
I loved Barcelona.
Barcelona. I hear a
And
lot
then I
of
went
people
to
say they like
Morocco
Spain.
more recently with two lady friends of mine. And I loved Morocco. Morocco was wonderful. Fez, particularly the
Yeah.
town of Fez. We made a big loop that started out in Casablanca and then went round in a big circle.
Did you buy a fez?
No, I didn't.
No. Do they
But
wear
I bought
fezzes
some
in
pottery
Fez? I don't
in
know.
Fez.
Yeah, yeah.
And I went up into the Atlas Mountains and got to see the Atlas Mountains. We went as far as we could go in a bus. It couldn't go beyond that because it had to turn around.
I know, of course, I know one of your dream places still to go, though, is where?
Africa.
I
I
know.
want to go to a big game preserve in Africa someday. That
I
was
know
always
you-
on my bucket list.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
not sure if I'll make it. We'll
Yeah,
see. I
well-
haven't given up yet.
Well, I tried to get Ellen as close to Africa as I could. I gave her this
you
little
came
book.
close.
I gave her this little book that actually they have it at the Bennington bookshop. They used to have it right up there at the counter, but I can't explain it. But you look at the pictures and
The
you move
pictures,
it
I
just
don't-
right,
what-
and the animals
Yeah,
are
if you
moving.
move the page, it looks like the animals are moving. I don't know what
right.
you call
I don't
that.
know either, but
It's
it's
tricky, but it has all the major animals in, and it's called safari.
Safari, right? It's as close
So
as
I
could
have
get.
a safari.
Right, that's as close as I could do it.
Well,
we
it was
also
very close.
We also both like hand puppets too.
Yes.
We enjoy our hand puppets, and I'm sure as a teacher, you used hand puppets a lot in your classes. I would imagine.
I did. I had a puppet on strings that was made out of styrofoam balls, and it looked like a stork.
A marionette.
Walking.
you
A
mean?
marionette.
Like
Yeah, it was a marionette,
Yeah.
I guess. And when the kids got sick of listening to me, I'd have the big bird, we called it, talk to them, and then
Yeah.
they'd really pay attention.
Right. Now I said you're going to have enough stories that we could talk for probably 3 days.
Yeah.
And you know what? I know we got a little more time left here, but I know we're going to have to continue our conversation another day because I
Oh,
just
I don't
know
know.
we're-
People must be
it's-
sick of it
no,
by
no,
now.
no, because you've had a lot of interesting things to say.
Well, I taught
so-
17 years junior primary at Molly Stark School, and it was wonderful. And then I taught 5 years art at Bennell, Catamount, and that was wonderful.
Did you
I
love,
did 6th grade 1 year.
how young did this love for art come into your life? Were
I don't remember
you
when
don't
I
remember?
wasn't involved with art. My
Yeah.
mother was an artist, and I used to draw in the margins of my notes all through school.
Yeah.
I had lots of pictures of that I did caricatures of my teachers, which weren't too popular. I had to sort of do those under the table.
Oh, I'm so happy to say that I do have a few of her pieces, and you mostly work in watercolors.
I switched to watercolor because I wanted something quick that I could do after school. I had started out as an oil painter, and one summer I went to watercolor school in New Hampshire to learn how to do it because I hadn't done watercolor before. And I went over there thinking I was going to meet a whole new group of people and take on a new skill. And the first person I got assigned to stay with was my high school French teacher's daughter. And it was like seeing a ghost because it was quite a number of years after I'd last seen my French teacher. She was long dead. And her daughter looked exactly like her. And I stayed with her for 3.5 weeks. And then the second summer I stayed for 6 weeks. And I stayed 3 weeks with her and 3 weeks with my first boyfriend and his wife, whom I had met many, many years before, Mac Windsor. His great aunt was Mary Windsor that founded the Windsor School. And my great aunt, Mabel Thomas, taught for her and founded her school and was a protege of Mary Windsor's. And Mac's family moved to Rowayton, Connecticut, and he, being a Windsor, was considered sufficiently proper to be introduced to me by my great aunt Mabel.
Yeah.
And he fell in love with my sailboat, and he was waiting to go in the Navy. So we sailed all that summer, and then finally he went off in the Navy. And I hadn't seen him for 39 years when I went to watercolor school, and who should show up but Mac Windsor and his wife just down the road.
Well, when we continue our conversation, and we will do this at some point, someday, we are going to get back together, and we will talk more about your being an artist and your being so involved in different. When I said you were an activist, there are many causes that you're interested in. We'll talk about all those things when we have you back again.
Well,
because
this has been lots of fun, Willie, and I'm honored to be asked, and thank you so much.
It's fun for me. It's fun for me, too. And I always end this show with a quote. And my quote today, believe it or not, is from Marcel Marceau.
Oh.
Now, Marcel Marceau was a mime, probably the greatest mime, M-I-M-E, that we've ever had. And he is quoted as having said, "It's good to shut up sometimes." I like that. Don't you like that?
That's a good one,
yeah,
yes.
I do too. And you know, before we are finished here, I also want to thank Ryan Stutt. Ryan has a production manager here at Cat TV. He has been involved with all of the Your Friends and Neighbors shows since it began.
Wonderful.
And he has been wonderful to me. He's been great in getting the shows on the air, and I really appreciate everything he's done. And so to fly in, Ryan, you rock.
Well,
So,
thank you, Ryan.
I want to thank you for being with us today, and we will continue this. We will have
thank you,
Don't
Willie.
Fence Her In Part 2. Okay? All right, so thank you everyone who's been listening today, and we shall see you next time.
I take a long look around, I have to say, this time of year, it becomes clear, those you hold dear, you draw them near, this time of day,